Hey everyone, I'm Erica Shellac and this is my presentation about how I applied Gardner's multiple intelligences theory. Before I go on to explain the teaching presentation I gave, I want to give everyone a brief overview of Gardner's theory to refresh your memories. Gardner is a psychologist and professor at Harvard's Graduate School. He first conceptualized his theory in 1983 with his book Frames of Mind. His theory asserts that everyone possesses all of the 8 intelligences he has described, but each person has their own unique intelligence profile. This means that each person has intelligences that they are stronger in and weaker in, and everyone has the ability to strengthen or weaken them. The current list of intelligences is as follows: linguistic, logical mathematical, musical, bodily kinesthetic, spatial, interpersonal, intrapersonal, naturalist, and Gardner is currently developing a 9th intelligence, which is existential. MI theory defines intelligence differently than the traditional view of intelligence that focuses on logic and language. MI theory states that everyone can improve in each intelligence, even though some are more predisposed to some intelligences than others, and that intelligence is not a fixed commodity. So now that you've been refreshed over what MI theory is about, I'll go over how I applied the theory. My audience was a group of 6 undergraduate pre-health professions students. There were 2 pre-nursing students, 2 pre-medical students, 1 pre-physical therapy student, and 1 pre-dental student. I presented information relevant to students looking to join the health field. We covered information about vital signs and how to take them, medications and dosage calculation, and information about asepsis and the chain of infection. A popular way for MI theory to be incorporated into the classroom is through learning centers, where students go through centers at their own pace, with each intelligence getting its own dedicated center. Given the nature of this being a one-time teaching opportunity, I decided to incorporate as many of the intelligences into my presentation as possible and present information in a variety of mediums and activities, and making mini-centers in a way. This approach fosters student motivation, student learning, and the strengthening of intelligences. Before the presentation began, I had the students fill out an MI inventory to show them what their stronger intelligences are. This allows for students to capitalize on their strengths and work on their weaker areas. After a brief discussion about the inventory and Gardner's theory, the presentation began. The first part of the presentation was an overview of the objectives for the presentation. MI theory calls for students to be involved in their own assessment. Part of this requires them to understand what is expected of them and how they will be assessed. The objectives I created for this presentation were: identify, take, and interpret 4 different vital signs: pulse, respirations, temperature, and blood pressure. Know the basic components of medications and be able to look up pertinent information in a drug guide. Be able to perform simple dosage calculations. Understand what asepsis is and how to maintain it, and understand the chain of infection. The foundation of the presentation was PowerPoint. To go along with the PowerPoint, I created fill-in-the-blank handouts to appeal to the linguistic intelligence. PowerPoint presentations also inherently appeal to the linguistic intelligence because of their mostly verbal content. I incorporated the logical mathematical intelligence by adding a section on dosage calculation and allowing the students to complete their own calculations. To appeal to the spatial intelligence, I used a variety of charts and visual aids to present information, such as normal ranges of vital signs. I also made separate handouts for the students that contained all of the charts. The bodily kinesthetic intelligence was utilized during the vital signs section of the presentation with hands-on learning. We broke into small groups and the students took each other's vital signs: pulse, respirations, temperature, and blood pressure. Interpersonal intelligence was appealed to through the group work that occurred during the presentation. The students worked together to check vital signs, as well as during the medication portion when they broke into pairs to find certain information on different drugs in drug guides. Intrapersonal intelligence was appealed to through the guided self-reflection at the end of the presentation. The students answered some questions I prepared about the presentation. I played music in the background during this time to appeal to the musical intelligence. Overall, the presentation created a variety of activities that appealed to the 7 main intelligences. I feel that the project went very well. I feel that part of this was due to the content of the presentation being relevant to the audience members I had. I also feel that the incorporation of various different activities and approaches worked better than I thought. I was afraid trying to tackle as many of the intelligences I could would be pretty difficult. The students were engaged in the process. They asked questions about the content and asked for clarification about things they weren't clear on. Some students chose to utilize the fill-in-the-blank handouts while others didn't. The ones who did not feel that they would help them better learn the content, and they preferred just listening. Everyone participated in the hands-on sequence where they learned how to take vital signs, including taking manual blood pressures. They asked questions during the sequence and made sure they were doing it all correctly. This all tells me that they were interested and engaged. Assessment gets tricky in the multiple intelligences theory. Gardner feels that the purpose of assessment should be to obtain information about a student's skills and potentials, and then to provide feedback to that student. He also does not believe that assessment and testing are interchangeable. Therefore, MI theory is not interested in pen and paper tests to assess learning in students, but rather observe their skill level in the task under construction. Preferred assessment methods for MI theory include student portfolios, independent projects, student journals, and assigning creative tasks. For this presentation situation, most of these are unrealistic and are more suited for traditional classroom settings. Therefore, using the intelligence profile, individual assessments were completed based on the student's profile, following the rubric, and by the self-reflection handout given at the end of the presentation. Assessment is also ongoing throughout the presentation during learning activities to show what they know, which is something noted to be important in assessment with MI theory. Overall, I feel that the students achieved the educational goals. During the self-reflection period, all students agreed that they came away with new knowledge using the objectives rubric as a guide. They also agreed that teaching strategies that take into account the different intelligences is something that would help them achieve their educational goals in the future. 4 of the 6 participants had a relatively mixed bag of intelligence proclivities, with a small handful of intelligences that they were more inclined to than others. Most said that they learned through the various intelligences. One student had a much higher logical mathematical intelligence, and she said the dosage calculation was the section she enjoyed most and felt she learned the most from. Another student had a much higher bodily kinesthetic intelligence than any other, and she said the hands-on vital signs section was the most engaging and she felt she learned the most from it. Overall, through talking with each student and from reading their journaling responses, educational goals were met, some a bit stronger than others based on the intelligence profiles. I think the overall setup of the presentation worked very well. Things are constantly changing. I wasn't just standing in front of them talking. The various activities kept everyone engaged and interested and made for a smooth presentation. I think that next time I would narrow down the number of intelligences I focus on. While it wasn't as difficult to tackle 7 intelligences as I was afraid it would be, I feel that students may take away more if there were activities focused on a select few intelligences. If I were to teach this group again, I would know their intelligence profiles and how they learn best. Therefore, I would plan activities that cater to their intelligence profiles. The answer to this question would be yes. Through the research I have done, I have come to really appreciate and admire the theory and the work that educators have done to implement the theory into their schools. I really appreciate the way it approaches intelligence, and I feel that appealing to several intelligences in a classroom or educational setting makes for a dynamic and interesting experience for students. This draws my presentation to a close. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. You can find my references as well as copies of the handouts provided to students in the presentation and a transcript of the presentation on Blackboard. I look forward to further discussing this theory and presentation with y'all.